All right.
Good morning. Um, Welcome to what we have come to discover is one of the most significant parts of what we do on this weekend, which is have a wisdom, what we call a wisdom conversation. And we used to call it conversation with an elder, but that turned out to be offensive to so many people. They were like, "Yeah, I'm not elder mode. Yeah, I'm not 90. I'm not." I'm like, "But since when did elder have to be 90? Don't be calling me no elder." Okay, so we're having a wisdom conversation with Dr. Emilie M. Towns, who, Lord, I don't know how long we've known each other, but it's been a while. At least 20 years, maybe longer. But I get to have conversations with people I admire and like, so that's the bonus for me. But the piece that it brings to this Woman Preach workshop is to help people as we're framing and thinking about sermons, is to think about what you need to be thinking about when you're getting ready to write a sermon. If that made any sense to you. How many of you were here last night for the poetry? Like, was that not like, oh my God, great? So the poets gave us a vision of what you need to be thinking about when you're thinking about a sermon, right? There's no, if you weren't here, even if we show you the video, there's no way, like we did tape it, but there's no way to tell you what happened in this room last night. Am I telling the truth, y'all? There were more people in the room than us. Absolutely full of ancestors. And for those of you who get scared about the word ancestors, the great cloud of witnesses. Dr. Emilie Towns is currently the dean here at Vanderbilt Divinity School and is an expert in Christian ethics, a womanist Christian ethics, and she does a lot around cultural theory. I think the piece that you wrote that probably had the most, you've written many things that had impact on my life, but The Fine Rain of Death was just profoundly impactful on my living, not just my thinking, but she's written and edited numerous books. I'm not going to read them all because I really want us to get to the conversation. But she's ordained American Baptist clergy, married now for what, 2 years? 3 years to her partner. And so we're going to have some, I hope, real conversation around what it means to, the phrase saving the whole folk is a play off of a word, off of a line from Alice Walker, loving the whole folk. And how do we build, as we were talking last night, a thriving community? I think Carla said, Catherine said, somebody said, make the circle wider still. Like, where is your boundaries and why are they so narrow or wide? You know, how do we make these kinds of decisions? So welcome, Dean Emilie Towns, to Woman Preach.
Thank you.
It's on. It's just.
Oh, I have to do like this.
Yeah. Can we turn up? Dean's?
Pretend like I'm Barry White. Come on, come on.
So thank you for being with us. I really appreciate it. I don't know how other people's appreciation is, so I speak only for myself. Every time we get together and do this weekend thing, we come up with a theme, and then we decide on a wisdom conversation partner. And for me, as we were thinking about what it meant for men and women who preach to together think about building a thriving community, I wanted to have a conversation about even the ethics of language, how we talk about community, who we exclude when we're talking about community, who doesn't even get thought about. I mean, it's not even like sometimes people are being exclusive. They just don't even think about sometimes. So I don't know. That's my starting point. You can start anywhere you want to, but that's my starting point.
One of the things I was thinking about as you were telling me your starting point actually is a step further back. And for me, it begins with who are we as people? You know, who is that person up there saying, "Thus says the Lord"? And do we give ourselves a strong check on who we are and what we believe and what we're saying? Or do we sort of try and cram ourselves into a mold that we think we should be, and we go on autopilot about what we say?
Right.
And we've not thought about it. We've not engaged it. We've just it's sort of the advanced Sunday school lesson of who a Christian is supposed to be, how a Christian is supposed to act. And I think for me, you can't build strong communities if you don't have strong moral fiber in the members of the community. And that's even more so for the leadership of communities. And if you're going to get up in front of a congregation or lead a group of people through talking in some way, be it community organizing or whatever, and you yourself are a mess, you may be a well put together mess, but that leaks out.
Right.
And people see it.
Right.
And sometimes folks can figure out what it is, and sometimes folks are just mystified. And the worst possible scenario is people just follow it.
Right.
And then you've got a messed up congregation.
Right.
Or a messed up social agency, or a messed up religious organization. So I start that one step back in what James Baldwin would say, doing your first works over. Doing an honest assessment of who we are and how we are. And not brag on it, but just tell the truth. Tell the truth about it. And recognize that in the midst of that, it's not going to be all bad stuff. I mean, we have such a high doctrine of sin ranging around in ourselves that we forget about the doctrine of creation and grace. And so we're gonna find both. Right. And both are a part of the human condition.
So that should have sounded familiar from last night, some, did it? Because we had this conversation about the first part of finding voices, figuring out who you are and how you're going to show up in the world. Like, you have to do some excavation, some personal excavation to get there. You use the phrase that often I think is, we're not saying the same thing when we say it, depending on who says it. You use the phrase moral fiber. So let's talk about that, because most of the times in my associations, when I hear people say moral fiber, what they actually mean is a catalog of behavior. And I don't think that's what you mean by that. So let's talk about what you mean by moral fiber.
I begin with the sense of integrity. One of the most important things that I think we have is just leaders, or should have, is a sense of integrity, that we live our lives in accordance to what we say we believe, which hopefully is something that brings in love and justice and hope and peace and you know that list. but that we actually try to do that in our day-to-day life. Not those grand events, but what I often call everydayness, the everydayness of living. It's those small things we do every day that really say who we are. Those unconscious things that we do without realizing we've done it, because that's just what we do. I'm always struck when students are talking to me about, well, how can I be an ally? And just fill in the blank of what kind of ally. And I say to them, think of the last significant public occasion in your family. Who was in the room? And they think about it for a while, and then I go, so what are the demographics? And when folks realize the demographics are very monochromatic of whatever kind, not just race, and I said, there's work there then to be done before you can be an ally. Because if those significant events, marriages, funerals, birthday parties, anniversaries, if people who show up look like versions of you, and that's it, allyship is not your first move. First works is your first move. And so integrity is that sense of understanding that what we do communicates what we believe, what we truly believe. And living that on a day-to-day basis, realizing that we are striving to be fully human with moments of divine, that we're going to succeed and we're going to fail, but the important thing is to continue to try and lean more into the success side of living a good life, of living a godly life.
I want to make sure that this is picking up. Is our mic picking up? He needs you to pick it up closer.
Okay.
I could feel that.
Okay. So those are the things, oh, I see the difference. Those are the things that I think of when I think of integrity, because I think we try to make integrity a lot more mysterious than it is. It's basically doing the right thing. And although we often try to act like we don't know what that is, we do. And we can fool ourselves or kid ourselves into believing that some of the scandalous stuff we do is the right thing, but it's not.
Do you have an example in your head? Because that still feels theoretical, but I know you're thinking about like very specific things. The thing I think most, that I'm thinking right now, not that I think most about, is the way we treat children, for example. You know, people who in the room who know I do Facebook, the thing that will drive me over the edge is when people start posting stuff that is designed to humiliate children, you know, in the name of parenting, which I find just unconscionable. And the ways in which we say, well, I was beat within an inch of my life and I survived, you know, as an excuse for abusing children, because it is abuse. For me, that's one example of what I mean by everydayness. Like I have in my head this notion that if a child doesn't want to be hugged by you, you don't hug that child. Because everybody deserves their bodily integrity. They should not be forced to hug you because you're bigger than them. Because that's what that is. So that's an example for me.
Yeah. No, I don't think I need to name another one. I think that's a very good one. But let me give another example. In my own day-to-day as a dean, one of the things I promised the faculty was transparency. For a whole host of reasons I will not go into this morning, but it was an important thing to promise. There are some days I wish I had not made that promise. But what I realized, and I have kept it, though I just sort of kicked myself, but what I have found is that working through telling the truth and being honest, and also in some cases holding confidentiality, which can be a very delicate balancing act, has moved the faculty forward in learning how to be a faculty that is beginning to trust each other. And just doing that on a day-by-day basis, even on those days when I don't want to, is something that I have found has been so important for leading a group, and particularly a group where the majority of although we got a whole bunch of black folk on our faculty, we are still not the majority. And so I'm working with white males, white females, Asian, Latino, Latina. It's a diverse faculty. So dynamics of race and racism, gender, sexism, heterosexism, homophobia, they're all present. But if I can be as transparent as possible and live into that, then it works better.
One of the things that preachers say often to me, well, first of all, they'll say things to me like, oh, you're so brave, you're so courageous, you'll say anything. That's not true. I won't say anything, although I'll push the boundaries on what I will say. But what I hear them saying is they are afraid to speak truth in the pulpit. Now, their reasons for this are many. One is people don't want to hear it, which I think is kind of unfair to the people, that we don't give people an opportunity to actually engage truth in a very specific way that's not just a trope they've always heard. And two, I think it is the fear of what truth we might have to tell ourselves. So my mother is my favorite. My mother's my favorite theologian. May she rest in peace. I quoted her last night of saying, tell yourself the truth even if you're planning on lying to everybody else. But the other thing she used to say to us all the time is, if it doesn't come out straight, it will come out crooked. Yeah. So talk about the ethics of, you said integrity, but not but. And I think people still, and I'm thinking about this room, still may need to think with you about how does that show up in the preaching? So what's the difference between bleeding on the people and sort of this kind of integrity in the pulpit? Did you get my question? Okay.
I think I do. The pulpit should not be our pastoral care moment for ourselves. And I have watched so many preachers work out their stuff in the pulpit and in the altar call, for those of us who are Baptists or Pentecostal, and I sit there and go, and I've only left a church once when that was going, and that was my home church at the time, where I was like, I cannot do this one more time, one more Sunday. I cannot hear this man do this to us one more time, because I just can't. And I was not the only woman who left church that Sunday. This was a pastor who every negative example in his sermon was a woman. And I couldn't do it another Sunday. Luckily, he was the pastor emeritus, so they didn't give him a lot of airtime every year, but he got up there at least 4 times a year, and every 4 times. It's not our pastoral care moment. It's not that place where we work out what's going on in our families, or in our associations with our fellow pastors or the boards, or that preaching is not about solving your administrative woes. It's not. Preaching is, for me, it's about the preacher literally wrestling with the text and trying to be as honest as possible about what you are hearing from that text, knowing that from one day you're going to hear one thing and another day you're going to hear something else. And that doesn't mean you're contradicting, that just means you're growing.
It also means that the text is multivariant.
Oh, absolutely.
We don't come to the text tabula rasa, and the text is not tabula rasa. Mm-hmm. Like the meanings arise in context. Mm-hmm. Meanings arise as wrestling is actually my favorite metaphor about the preaching, wrestling a blessing from the text, because sometimes the good news is not in the text. Mm-hmm. Sometimes the good news is this ain't good news, but and and being honest enough to say that, because I think the other piece, now this is around ethics of preaching for me, the other piece is the way we lie with the text, mm-hmm. where we feel like we have to walk along and agree with the text that we know is not, it's just not true. Mm-hmm. Like my favorite example, the one that's in the book that I'm finishing finally, is the Jephthah's daughter piece. Mm. It's like that. Now people either I'm not going to preach it, or they do what somebody I know did, which is say, Jephthah was faithful to the vow he made, as if that somehow is legitimate. And so I say, okay, the only thing that ever comes to meet warring men in the Bible are dancing women. So the question is, which woman were you planning to sacrifice? And how is that okay that we keep building communities where it's okay to sacrifice women and children? Like, now that'll preach for me all day long, because that's against that text. I'm never going to agree with anybody who says, but the Bible says, and she agreed. Well, she agreed because she was in a patriarchal society that allowed that. I'm not in that society. And it's not the world I want to live in. Mm-hmm. And it's not the world I want to create. So it's as Dr. Will Gaffney say, it's biblical, but it ain't godly.
Yeah, I think it's also important to realize that the Bible is full of positive examples and negative examples. And we try to change them all into positive. And sometimes the Bible is saying, don't do this. Here's an example of what you don't do, not what God is telling you to do. And and this is where my urging of students and congregations and myself, fearless Bible study. The text is not going to kill you, and God is not afraid of our questions.
Thank you.
So tackle it and be engaged with it, and realize that we are not called to be immature Christians when it comes to reading the Bible. We are to come to the Bible trying to grow ourselves up and to be engaged as adults in a world that sometimes the children are older than we are when it comes to the Bible. Because they see stuff and they ask, and we're like, don't ask that question.
Yeah, I was teaching a class one time. A student almost had he was apoplectic because he grew up in a church where he was told you cannot question God. You cannot question the Bible. And of course, that's my pedagogy. It's like, well, ask a question. What's the question? Who's in there? Who's not there? That kind of, whose voice don't you hear? Why is that important? And that kind of thing. But if you grew up in this environment, I'm talking to preachers now, where you you were told not to question, your first duty is to kill that critic in your head so that you can become a faithful questioner. When you, even if you look at the, in my mind, if you look at the gospel text, when I love the story when the rich young ruler comes to Jesus and he says, "What must I do?" And Jesus' question isn't "do this," it's "what are the commandments? What do you think? How do you read it? How do you interpret it?" It is literally, how do you interpret it? He gives an interpretation. Jesus says, "Okay, go do that and live." It's the most profound example of we are responsible for our own interpretations.
And that scares us because, again, when we think we're not good enough because we got this doctrine of sin ranging around in our heads, we think that what we see, what we feel, what we hear, what we're experiencing from the text, and then the reverberations of that text through history is somehow inadequate. We need to get a get tall theology with that, because part of what's going on is we are becoming the gatekeepers of our own salvation. Not somebody else, not a larger society, not folks somewhere else, somewhere in Washington or wherever. Here in Tennessee, the State House. That's an interesting group of people. But it is, we ourselves are killing ourselves. We're killing our soul. We're killing our freedom. And we don't believe that we're doing it. We think it's somebody else. That's why First Works is so important. Is that you've got to be able. I got so much flack from conservative web pages for my installation here a couple of years ago when I had the temple choir sing "Man in the Mirror." And it was only because it was Michael Jackson. And I'm like, have you listened to that song? Do you not see the deep, profound theological wrestling of all people Michael Jackson was doing? And nope, it was Michael Jackson.
Some of that, I think, is our propensity. I want to come back to something because we're almost out of time for this part before we open it up to other people. But some of that, I think, is our propensity to draw this sort of thick line that we call between sacred and secular. And if I could take a big eraser and get rid of any line, I think that's the line I would erase first, because I think that line too is around our misogyny, certainly around our heterosexism and our sort of homo antagonism. I don't say phobia. People ain't scared. They just mean. They're not scared. They're not scared. They're just mean. So this sort of antagonism toward people in the community, the energy it takes for us to hate folk could be really served in a different, would serve the community a whole lot better if we believed that other folk had to work out their salvation instead of us working out their salvation, because then we don't have time to work out our salvation and be in community with people. This need to tell people what we think about their salvation, I want you to talk about that just a little bit. I know.
I grew up in a religious world, where all of life was sacred. I didn't even know how to spell profane till I got into college. Literally, I'd never heard the word, because every ounce of what goes into every day is of God. So this sacred, secular, profane, religious, it makes no good sense to me, and it invites the kinds of things we're having to undo in ourselves because we think that we can warehouse or section off or silo off those pieces of ourselves and other people and on and on and on. I like homo antagonism. I'm gonna have to quote you. I promise I'll quote you when I use it, because what that points to is the importance of our taking responsibility for our own actions, and the fact that we would really like somebody else to do that. Um, and we think, as you were pointing out, if we spending so much time worrying about somebody else, then somehow that takes care of the work we should be doing. Lazy, lazy, lazy. It is not going to get us any closer to the pearly gates, as far as I'm concerned, because it does not give us a sense of how hard we must work in order to be in partnership with God. It's not just that God's grace and mercy abounds, and that's wonderful. We have to work to accept it because we have so many roadblocks that keep us from accepting that grace, that mercy.
Yeah, so I think that demonic, to use this sort of biblical language, is this sort of, I'm thinking about the demoniac, because help me, Gazarin, that is this being out of our mind and out of our own bodily integrity and out of, so he is, in the end, it says, to use the King James, he's clothed in his right mind, and it's because he's naked and he's chained and he's all of that. He is bearing the community's ill, right? Because they can look at him and say, well, he's the crazy man in the tomb. And when he gets free, they get scared. And they say, get out of our land, Jesus. Because now, if you heal the most crazy among us, what the rest of us going to have to deal with, right? So they don't want to deal with their own sort of broken nakedness, for lack of a better, that text is that for me. So when we're talking about building a thriving community, it is being able to face ourselves as we watch other people get healed. Let me just say, because I want to talk about the elephant that's in Nashville. Y'all didn't think I was going to let it go.
I'm thinking, which one? We got a bunch.
I know, but particularly I'm talking about the fact that American Baptist College has invited Reverend Dr. Bishop Yvette Flunder, actually the second time. So this is not even her first time being at ABC. This is just the first time that this crew has decided that that they couldn't protest dead black people, so they thought they would take on Bishop Flunder, which is kind of funny to me, who's been married to her partner for 30 years.
Yeah.
Been with her partner for 30 years, longer than most of them. And without a divorce. Yeah, I'm going all the way there.
And faithful.
And faithful. And Alan Bosick, really? You're taking on Alan Bosick, who has been in the fire in South Africa? And Delman Coates, who, he's, is he American Baptist or National Baptist? National Baptist. Both duly affiliated and has fought for human rights in the Maryland area. So Bishop Flunder, yes, I signed the petition for them not to rescind her invitation. So, because I think that part of what's going on, I'm being really honest, I think part of what's going on is the fear that if people encounter her deep spirituality, they might change. because it certainly happens to people over and over. And I see people who like, well, I don't know what to do now that I met Bishop Flunder, because like I could really hold on to that. I really want to say the word that's in my head, but I'm trying to be nice. Yeah, this is free. You know, I could hold on to that shit before, but now, you know, what I'm going to do with somebody who sings and prays and encounters God like this? Like, how do I hold on to a theology that keeps these people, and I'm using that language very intentionally, out of community if that's who she is? Like, if I can't make her an exception, if I can't. So I think the whole notion of not even wanting people to encounter the holiness that comes in the room with her is this fear that I was talking about at the tomb with the demoniac. You say what you want about that, and then we'll open up.
Yvette, let me just say, Yvette is a friend.
Mine too, I should say.
Yeah, and so let me just do full disclosure. I met her, oh God, probably 20 years ago when she was just getting City of Refuge off the ground. And she and some of her congregants came and took a summer school class I was teaching at Pacific School of Religion. And I thought at the time, something different is happening here. So I have watched her ministry flourish over the years. And I met Mother Shirley then, too. And I thought, Now, nobody was talking about anybody's sexuality, but we're all sitting around the table and everybody knows. So it was okay. Last fall, there was a conference at Columbia University on black sexuality and black religion. And I was stunned simply because we were having a conference on it. And it was over 200 people showed up. Bishop Flunder was one of the speakers in an evening session on black sacred music and homosexuality. Something she knows a little bit about. And it was in one of the local churches. I forget, I think Metropolitan, but I'm not sure which church now. And the floor was open for question and answer. And the first person on the mic was trying to cast out demons, and just went the whole way with it. And people in the congregation, me one of them, unfortunately, go, "What the?" And Bishop Flunder said, she stopped all of us and said, "Let her speak." And so she continued to get it out, and Bishop Flunder, it was the most amazing counseling session I have ever seen, in which Bishop Flunder said, I was where you were, where you are. And I know that healing is coming. And the woman did not want to hear that. And she just kept being present and pastoral and loving and caring. And the woman finally gave up and left. And people started to clap, and she stopped us. I said, "No, she is on a journey. And we have to respect her journey." So it wasn't just her ministering to the woman, it was her ministering to us about how you really do be an ally. I think it's interesting that they're all upset about an out black lesbian woman coming to preach the gospel when so many of them are on the down low.
Right.
Now, I don't know about this group and who's in it, but I do know there are a lot of black male pastors who are on the down low. And that's what I was talking about, integrity. You cannot get up there and blast people for the very thing you're doing between the sheets in hotel rooms. And the fact that she lives her life with integrity, that she has built an incredible ministry for folks who are HIV positive and folks who have full-blown AIDS. And she did it at a time where people were not caring about black folk, who were the largest population of people in the Bay Area, HIV positive and with full-blown AIDS. And she continues that work. Um, it just boggles my mind. And then they really messed with the wrong person with Forrest Harris, because he has a long record of progressive theological and ministerial beliefs and practices. And one of the main reasons he took on the presidency of ABC is to say black folk need to have an experience of liberation in their Christianity, where they become the thinking, feeling beings that we should be. So yeah, I'm gonna be up there on Tuesday night.
Yeah, I sure wish I could be here, just because I like being in the mix of stuff. But I ain't gonna lie, that's my only reason for wanting to be here. I'm like, really? It's a fight? What? I ain't gonna lie, that's the truth. And when that's spiritual about that for me, it's like, really? Like, let me open up for questions, because really, honestly, all of this is around preaching. Let me say this about preaching. I think part of the challenge for me also is that I don't know that people know what preaching is. Like, preaching is not the getting people told. You said that. It's not even the teaching moment for the church, although oftentimes preachers use it for a teaching moment. It really is. I think 1 John 1 says it best. It is the proclamation of the things we have seen and heard and our hearts have felt, and that we most surely believe. And this is why I said last night, figure out what you most surely believe, not what you've been told to believe. And even if you say, as someone said to me, I don't care what you say, you're not going to make me believe God is a mother. I'm like, I'm not trying to make you believe that. I'm testifying to what I know about God. Like, I'm not trying to make you believe it, but if the preacher can clearly articulate what she or he has experienced in the realm of the holy and come back to report it, then they give people something to work with. And I often think we're so busy trying to tie a bow on it to tell people what to believe that we don't give them the opportunity to cultivate the tools from what we've said for our own journey. So, all right, questions for Dr. Towns or me or statement? And Markeith has the mic. Comments?
Thank you.
You're welcome.
When you refer to returning to your first works, can you talk about what that means and what that looks like?
I start each day in silence, and usually alone, because I'm an early riser, and my partner is not, and neither is our dog. And my aunt is 2 floors down from us in the same household. Now, she's up too, but we both respect each other's early morning time. One of the things that I do periodically in that early morning is to start taking an inventory. And sometimes I start as far back as I can remember. And sometimes I have a much closer period back. And I go through successes and failures and in different times and ask myself, what did I learn? What did I learn from that? What did I learn from, well, this morning it was, what have I learned about saying yes to God to come here, to Nashville, and to Vanderbilt, and to the deanship, with a family that includes a partner, a dog, and an 81-year-old aunt. We are an interesting crew when we roll. But, and just go through the list and try to be honest about those things that I have. I often don't journal when I do it. It's usually mental. But sometimes I do need to journal to keep up with all the stuff that's going on. And then I sit back and I go, okay, this is what I've learned. Now, what am I going to do with what I've learned? How can I continue to apply what I have learned has been a positive way to live my life, and how can I try not to do the negative stuff anymore or less of it? And that's First Works. That's First Works. It's really trying to get a sense of what have you learned from living, and then what can you do to apply what you've learned, so that we don't continue to make the same mistakes. We may make different ones, but we also celebrate those things that have been wonderful for ourselves or for others in the process.
There's a hand.
Thank you. Emilie, this is Harry Knox. I am afraid to ask a question because it is inchoate, my favorite word right now. I don't like to be inchoate. I like to always know exactly what I'm going to say before I say it. But I trust you all. In my work as a public theologian, trying to represent ideas that are not from my community and people who are not close by me, that I have to seek community with, not don't find it quickly. What advice can you give me about preaching in particular, and how to avoid colonization of other people's stories, even as I'm trying to tell some hard truths to people like me who are in power and need to make some different kinds of decisions?
I think here, what womanism has to say about particularity is very important. One of the things that I have learned over time is that in telling my personal story as clearly and as precisely and as intelligibly as possible opens up the possibility for folks hearing their stories. And it's an odd phenomenon to watch happen the first few times it does. The best example I have is when I was teaching at St. Paul School of Theology in Kansas City, Missouri. And we had an ex-Marine in class with us. And he looked like an ex-Marine. And he and his wife took all their classes together. And despite our best efforts as a faculty to try and get them to differentiate, they were not having it. So she was in class with him. And I don't know if they wrote their papers together, but it was eerily similar. And one night I was telling a story about my grandmother. I don't even remember the story now. But I was being fully Southern and had gotten into telling all the details of the smells and the sounds and the expressions and, you know. And I looked up and tears were just streaming down his face. And usually when students do that in class, I leave them alone because they're doing something they need to do, and I don't want to call attention to it. and everybody was seeing it anyway. But this was extreme enough. I stopped and I said, "Are you okay? Do you need to take some time and come back to class?" And he said, "No, I don't. But your story reminded me of something my grandfather has been trying to tell me since I was a little boy." And I just heard him. And I thought, damn, this particularity does work. Because one of the things that, and this is not, and, I wasn't doing it for, this is, you got to be careful, you're not doing therapy. But this is one of the things that I think is so important for us. We sometimes think we have to use somebody else's story to be the example of what we're trying to get to. And I think in preaching, if we are interacting with our story and the text and sharing that with others, the listeners, folks will get it. Folks will hear it. And if we're not sure, we just tweak it a little bit. Are you listening? Can you hear? Can you see? How's this working for you? I mean, you just do little prompts. You don't do big ones. I just think it works better when we use ourselves, because our witness of our journey is more powerful than trying to bogart somebody else's witness.
Witness is the right word. Harry, thank you for the question, because I want to push around the colonization piece. That was your very particular word, is because you're doing reproductive rights, right? So on a whole lot of levels, male, there's a lot around that people, well, what do you have to say about, reproductive rights? But this is what it means. I'm a little antsy about the word ally these days. I've come to a place where I don't like it, but I don't have another word for it. Solidarity isn't working for me either. So I'm just like, be about that life. It's like, be about that life. So if you want freedom, then you want freedom for other people, which is why you're doing the work you're doing. I know that about you. I'm glad to say I know that about you. So I think the piece about colonization is what we were talking about checking yourself. Am I playing Great White Hope? And, is this a Great White Hope moment for me? Men, am I playing knight in shining armor? Women, am I playing great mother? Am I swooping in to, I have a friend who checks me all the time. It's like, I know they call you Mama B, but you ain't my mama. It's like I have a mothering kind of something to me, but I'm not mother to, whatever, whoever. So what I'm offering into the world is it authentically, you came to this work because you care about it. That's the story that has to be told, right? Why do you care about it?
I have a question. Judy Cummings. So I'm a local pastor here of a church who is taking its time over a period of time to truly become an open, welcoming, and affirming congregation. And so we have people who are at different points on their journey. So thank you for the quote from Bishop Blunder, allow this person to be on the journey where they are. But I want to just kind of push back, Dean, on always telling our story. So that's fine if you are itinerant and you're going in. But every Sunday, to always be pushing yourself up and sharing your story, because you know as a pastor over a period of time where you're trying to take people. I sat under a pastor who every Sunday he was telling something about himself, and that was the church I wanted to walk out of. If I have to hear one more story about you, But how do you balance that? Because you do want to share your journey because you've been there and you know where you are and you know where you're trying to take the people. But how do you balance that without pushing yourself up?
Right. I certainly wasn't talking about doing it every Sunday. I don't want to hear about myself every Sunday. So I know nobody else does. Yeah, yeah. Well, you know, wonderful has its limits. I think well, I'll tell you what I did when I was pastoring. I pastored a church for 3 years while I was in doing doctoral studies. And what I tried to do is, particularly when there were moments of dissension in the congregation, of course, there would be, is rather than use an objective, safe example, I would turn it on myself briefly and say, okay, now what can we learn from this struggle together? And then turn back into the text and start working the text again to help us think about what do we do together, having made myself vulnerable by admitting I got clay feet too, so that what the congregation heard from what their feedback was I don't have the answers. I'm struggling like the rest of us. Let's work on this together. Because I think that so much of preaching poorly is telling people instead of asking people to be on a journey with you to discover what the text is talking about to each one of us, because we hear the text differently in a congregation. And allowing that space for people to come in with their own moments of aha or oh no or whatever is so important. So it's a balancing.
So it is a balance, and I'm going to push back just a little bit, Judy, because there's a telling of a story that's ego. That's all about you, you know, look at me, ego. And there's this telling of the story of like this. My grandmother taught us how to make gumbo. That's a whole different story than I'm the best damn gumbo maker in the country. Like, you know what I'm saying? That's a whole different story. I grew up in the country eating wild strawberries. I know what it means for strawberries to pop up on the side of the road and become nourishment to folk who don't have other things. That's a different story than, that's my story. I grew up in the country eating wild strawberries, washing them off in the creek right behind our house. That's a very different story than if you want me to bring you strawberries, you're going to have, you know, you get what I'm saying? The telling of the story is the reason you're telling the story. It's why am I telling the story? If I tell a story, I'm going to tell you a story. When I was a hospice chaplain, I pastored, by the way, for 27 years. So I say what I'm saying out of that place. When I was a chaplain, this was one of the shifting moments for me around LGBT issues. This moment. I was a chaplain. I get a phone call at 2 o'clock in the morning. I had the night shift. The nurse says to me, "Chaplain, we have a patient that's in distress, and he's not in physical pain. He's in spiritual and psychic pain. Can you come to 8th floor?" I say, "Sure." So I get to 8th floor, and this is in the time of universal precautions. I'm supposed to put on all this gear, including rubber gloves and a mask and whatever. This is at the beginning of the AIDS epidemic. I got to his door, and I knew I was not going to do that. I didn't put on any of the gear. I've broken all the rules right then. I walk in the room, and he is sobbing. I break rule number 2. I sit on the bed with him. He leans into me, and I just hold him for an hour. He's crying, now I'm crying. This is rule number 3 that's broken. When he can finally tell me what's going on, he explains to me that his partner of 15 years has just walked out and said to him that he can't watch another friend die from this disease. He had already been kicked out of his father's house, who was a Southern Baptist preacher, who told his siblings that if they contacted him, that he would disown them too. He had not been touched by another human being that didn't have gloves on for 4 years. And so in that moment, we were human together. I said, I am never going to ever be on the side of people who would disown someone in their hour of need. That can't be God. Now, that story ain't about me. It's my story, but that story really is not about me. That actually happened to me. When I've told that story in congregations that are struggling like yours, people go, because they don't think of people with AIDS or they don't think of LGBT people as people. Now, we're talking about community. I'm honestly, it's like, no, you're a straw person. You are something for me to shoot at. You're not a guy at 2 o'clock in the morning crying because the last person who's loved you has walked out, who's not had human skin contact in 4 years. Can you even imagine that? Like, really, honestly, can you imagine 4 years of not having skin-to-skin touch? I can't. But that moment shifted every theological bone in me. I don't know how I'm going to prove it in the Bible. I don't even know if I got to. But I'm done. This moment, 1995. See what I mean? That's my story. But it's not my story. That story actually belongs to this community. See the difference in what I'm trying to say? I think we're out of time for questions. And y'all said no. Yes, we are, because I promise you, we got another part coming that's just as powerful as this. Help me thank Dean Emilie.
Thank you all.
All right, take 5, and we're going to start back in 5 minutes.